views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WPSL. However, we're the ones that encourage you to like and share them on social media and with all your friends and neighbors. It's about the events of the Treasure Coast going on. And it's the Sue Ellen Sanders Show with Sue Ellen Sanders.
Welcome, and we're glad you're here. It's after St. Patrick's Day by the time this show runs, but it's still celebrating the luck of the Irish and your good luck all weekend long. I'm sure you can still get a glass of green beer in whatever your favorite place to go is. So that's appropriate. I've always thought that good luck is made, it's not given. I think we make our own good luck. And my guest today is a gentleman, a psychology professor at Indian River State College, named Robert Ott. It's Dr. Robert Ott, and he is a PhD. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you for your invitation, Sue Ellen. I'm very excited to be here.
You are a psychology professor, and you actually are also a high school teacher. You're at Fort Pierce Central, is that correct?
I am.
And what kind of classes? You teach psychology there as well?
I do. I teach regular psychology for the students there, but I also am an instructor for the Duel Enrollment program, which works in concert with Indian River State College. And I produce, actually, Fort Pierce Central with my leadership and also a couple other people like Miss Stacy Summer, for example. Throughout leadership, we now have the highest concentration of students earning a dual degree. And what that means is both a high school and also an associate's degree. And we lead St. Lucie County in graduates when it comes to AA. So we're doing something right there.
You
and
are.
And then I also work in the evening at the college instructing students in the evening.
One of the things that you teach also and at Fort Pierce Central, I know, is student success. And it's kind of like you're getting those kids on the ground floor of their life. They're getting ready to start the rest of their life. They're preparing, and you help give them the information and the advice and the tools they need to be successful. You're also the author of a book called A Practical Approach to Life Satisfaction. And that's powered by emotional knowledge and grit. Life satisfaction might mean something to different to each of us.
You're absolutely right. I like to say it's got subjective value, and what I mean by that is we all have an understanding of how satisfying or dissatisfying our life is based on a criteria that we think is important to us. Some people, it might be a successful marriage. Other people, it could be a thriving career. Some people feel success based on another set of rules that they determine is important for them. So it's really subjective, and it's very personal to the individual.
The other thing that I noticed, having been around for quite a while, is that a lot of people, especially young people, are waiting for something specific to happen for their life, and then such as their life satisfaction to start. So, and actually, it's not just young people. Sometimes it's middle-aged and other people. They're like, oh, when I buy a house, that's when my adult life will start. When I get married, when I move, when I graduate college, and you set these artificial starting dates for your life, but actually life is an ongoing thing, and so life satisfaction is ongoing too.
It is. In fact, it's very ongoing, and I think you struck a thought and something that I see constantly among adolescents in the school system, and that's both young people at the college when I'm instructing, and specifically at the high school when I'm interacting with students constantly, and the same theme comes up. They just want to be happy. Well, what is happiness? Why is it that people are striving for something? Is happiness an unrealistic emotion that maybe we should abandon and focus more on life satisfaction? Because let's face it, if you're only going to be happy when you get that college degree or you get married, what happens after that? You have to look for something else that might be bigger and more grandiose for you to feel more happy with your life, which isn't going to happen. And it's because we place value on external events to determine how we should feel emotionally.
What should we be placing the value on?
I think joy.
Okay.
Imagine if we could abandon happiness for just a moment. And I'm not saying that happiness doesn't exist, but the way we approach happiness is my concern. Because we can't fill our lives with intangible things or accomplishments or achievements. What we need to focus on is the moment. We need to have that internal experience where we feel more contentment, we feel more joy. And as a result of that, when we measure our life over a lifespan, we experience more contentment because we hit more milestones that are more realistic and we feel more accomplished in our lives. It's not about creating the next invention that's going to make us feel accomplished and noteworthy. It's about how do we perceive ourselves in the moment that is defining us. Like you and I, for example, I value your time right now. I feel a moment of joy because I'm interacting with you. And eventually that's going to disappear. But I'm trying to always find joy in the moments throughout my life, daily and hourly, not something that's out in the distance. Because when that distance comes and we achieve it, what then? And I think that's one of the...
Then there's a big letdown because you feel like you have nothing else to achieve.
Yeah, that's right. And it's because it's unrealistic. It's an unrealistic achievement that we're striving for. Because at the end of the day, what's really important is how do we feel right now? And what I always tell the young people that I interact with every day, imagine this. Imagine that you're no longer focusing on external events to make you feel happy, but rather you're focusing on the moment. You're focusing on the interaction with another person. You're showing empathy. You're motivated by social awareness. You're developing social skills. You're meeting certain accomplishments and satisfying those things daily. Now you're experiencing more joy with your life. And as a result of it, if you can experience more joy today than you did yesterday, you're on your way to experiencing more satisfaction in your life. The important thing to note too, Sue Ellen, is positive emotions like happiness and feeling charitable, for example, as opposed to negative emotions like pride and jealousy. And if you can take inventory every single day on how many positive emotions and negative emotions you have, and then start making structural changes to your performance every day, eventually you'll start to show more positive emotions as opposed to negative, and eventually you'll start to experience more satisfaction in your life. And if you could do that over a period of time, you can argue that you're in fact much happier than you were years ago.
Okay, so what about the influence of people in your life and of places in your life? What if, you have a friend who always makes you feel negative about yourself, or conversely, you have that friend that always makes you feel joy and happiness, and it's not like they're constantly saying, "Oh, Sue Ellen, you're the greatest thing on earth," but you feel very valued in their audience, whether it be your husband or your fiance or your child. Do you drop those people who are bringing the negativity in your life, or do you drop those places that make you feel negative?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it's also complex and
difficult. Oh, see, I love being called fascinated.
And it's very difficult to answer.
Yeah.
I would say I would not personally drop my friendship or relationship with people if they were complaining too much or they were bringing out the worst in me. However, I would limit my interaction with them. And I would try to reinforce interactions with us that are more positive. And over a period of time, and I've demonstrated this with family members and also close friends of mine, where I no longer interact with them when it is a negative exchange or some type of interaction that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I'll actually say something to them. And I won't blow them off, and I won't stop talking to them, but I do limit my interaction with them. And what I found is that we don't interact as often, but when we do, it's more positive. And I'll usually get a phone call or a text to say, I haven't complained in a while. I did today on the phone. I'm sorry about that. And
So they know where you're coming from there.
They do. They do. And I don't think we should cut people off, because when we do that, it makes them feel uncomfortable, inferior. It causes maybe mild depression. It can cause them to feel more anxious. Maybe they even question, is there something wrong with me?
Isn't that their problem, though?
Well, it is their problem, but it's all of our problem.
They're being the whiner. I mean, I don't mean to be cruel. I'm just being the devil's advocate here.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is their problem, but I also see it being our problem too, or even my problem, because one of the things that I recognize as a psychologist is that my job is to make people feel good about themselves.
Ooh.
And that means when we're interacting with one another, we have to have some type of an exchange. And if I don't feel good about that exchange, I need to address it. I'm not one to let things drift into the future and then address it. I like to address things as they unfold before me. I do this with students, and anybody that's ever been around young people for a long period of time knows that they have to address things as they occur.
They do. They do. And as a mother who went through teenage years with my children, I can tell you for sure that if they did something, I needed to bring it up right away, because bringing up at a time where they came in late from curfew and then unloading all the things they did wrong over the last 6 months, which I had a bad habit of doing.
You kept the scorecard, didn't
I
you?
did. I totally kept the scorecard, and I did not even need to take notes about it. But I would hold off and hold off and hold off. For example, when my son was a teenager, he would always leave the towels on the floor, and I would just quietly pick them up and put them away. And then whenever he did something that I needed to really talk to him about, I would bring up those darn towels on the floor. And then it would just spiral out of control, because I was doing, it probably would have been better just to say, hey, go hang up your towel. And I know that's a minor, that the mother-teenager relationship is fraught, but I also wanted to bring up the fact that at the time, my children are in their middle to late 20s now, so we're through this period. But at the time, my children as teenagers made me feel really inferior about myself. They made me feel very bad about myself, because there was nothing I could do or say that they didn't roll their eyes at. And sure, other people and mommy blogs and books and TV, you saw it mirrored in real life, and also on TV and in movies, so you knew it was a natural thing. But yet, when it happens to you, you take it quite personally. So, do you have kids?
I don't have kids.
So you've never had to go through that time in your life, but have you ever been around somebody who regularly rolled their eyes at you?
Absolutely. And it's interesting, as you were telling me that story, I was thinking about my undergraduate years at Stony Brook University in New York. And I remember reading a book that was assigned to me, and I don't remember what subject, but probably not that important. But there was one thing in the book that really stood out. It said something along the lines, when I was young, I knew everything. When I was older, I realized I didn't know much of anything. And it was signed anonymously, comma, PhD. And that always stood out to me, because when I think about kids rolling their eyes, and they do it to me in the classroom, I know they do it with other teachers.
So you have a classroom of kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a classroom. What I find is, and I think that this is common with the way they interact with their parents, they don't think their parents have experienced too much. They don't think their parents are as smart as they should be. They think their parents have lived a sheltered life, and I think that goes to why they might roll their eyes to some degree. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. And when I go back to that coined expression that I just mentioned to you, I think you get to a point, as I did, when I used to think that way of my parents, I get to a point in my mid-20s, I look at my parents and I say, wow, I'm only now starting to understand how smart they were. and the brilliance behind their decisions. And when I was
I
younger,
hope you tell them.
I do all the
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
and they just smile and laugh.
Yeah.
But when I'm younger, I knew it all. And I think many of us are like that. And I don't know if you had the same experience with your parents when you were younger, but I reckon the answer is probably yes, unless you say otherwise.
No, oh, definitely. It was. However, and that's the other thing about that parent-child relationship that is fraught with angst, no matter really how old you are, because no matter how old you are, you're still your parents' baby. And if they continue to treat you like a baby, you're going to continue to act that way. It's like in my mom passed away a couple of years ago, but up until the point the last time I walked into her house, I still felt myself change. I felt myself acting differently in her house.
You were regressing to an earlier part in your life where mom took care of everything.
I was regressing to an earlier part of my life where mom and I disagreed with everything.
And you were reliving those moments.
Yeah. So what I did because she was up in her 90s at that point. So what I did to create a more successful environment, being aware that I did that, is I kept the subjects to the things that I knew we agreed on. So books, we agreed on books. We agreed on puzzles. We agreed on things like playing Scrabble. And those are the things that I geared on with the relationship. We agreed on food. And so that I just didn't bring up the things that I knew that she would argue with me about or that I would argue with her about. Because after a certain amount of years, I realized that yes, I was going to regress. I was going to act differently. And the way to keep myself from doing that was not to create those situations that were dangerous treading. I was going to tell you something else, too. I had a mental health therapist on here right before the Thanksgiving holidays, and we were talking about Thanksgiving and other holiday dinners where you may travel and you may get together with relatives that you aren't frequently around, and how to handle that, especially in light of everybody being so polarized in their opinions now. And she had a list of things that you could do that were very effective in when you were going into those situations. And some of the things that stood out in my mind were what I said about bringing up the subjects and the things that I knew that we agreed on and avoiding the ones that didn't. And then the last thing on her list, and I love this and I will always remember it, was remember where you left your coat. And I was like, remember where you left your coat? She goes, yeah, when all else fails, be ready and prepared for a quick departure when things go down. And I love that. And I think of that now when I'm in, and so sometimes it's not an actual coat. Sometimes it's a proverbial coat. Know when to leave a situation. And it doesn't just work with family members. It seems to work pretty well with anyone.
Yeah, I think it does work well with anyone. And I think most people don't want to argue and they can't help but insert their opinions into things. And that's when it gets uncomfortable. And we have to look for that way out. We have to look for that exit sign and figure out a strategic way to leave and depart. What you were saying resonates with me because I even find myself doing that with my parents now. My mother and I have very different political views. And one of the things that I've chosen to do is not talk about it. And when she chooses to talk about it when I'm visiting, I go into a different room. I disappear for about 5 minutes. I come back and we're on to something different. And I like that.
Yeah. And actually one of the other things the mental health therapist had suggested was to do a little homework before you go into that situation. And it may not be a family dinner. It may be going to a cocktail party or an event where you already know that people around you are going to be contentious or you're going to be disagreeing with something they said, to be prepared with those subjects that you know that you're on the same grounds of where you know that you agree and have some subjects. Maybe it's, beyond the weather. Maybe it's some other type of random factoid that you came across, or a news story that was. My husband is just the king of trivia. He loves these news stories, especially if they have historical significance. So he'll bring up things that are so random, and that's very successful when you're trying to change the subject, or you're trying to talk to people with an anecdote that everybody will, oh yeah, that was pretty neat, or TV shows or movies, not so much movies now. So we were talking about friends, and we were talking about earlier the fact that everybody is different. So life satisfaction is different for everybody. So your advice or the tools that you give different people will be different too, correct?
Yeah, and it's not just one thing that I mentioned in the book. I explain to people that there's different ways to experience this. I provide academic material. I also provide a very detailed account of my life, looked or viewed through a psychological lens from adolescence to adulthood. And I use a lot of psychology, philosophy, literature, and to talk about my story. And there's going to be something in that people are going to be able to relate to, and that's the important part. And whatever they resonate with is what they're going to start to gravitate towards as far as making changes in their life, and that's the important thing.
So then everybody may not be able to use all of the information in the book, but they will be able to recognize the parts that will be useful to them?
I think so. And if I could share a statistic with you.
Sure.
The National Institute of Mental Health in 2019 said that we have just over 19 million Americans in our country that are suffering from depression. In 2020, that statistic increased threefold, and it's somewhere around 32%, which puts it at 84 million people that are adults over the age of 18 that are suffering from depression right now. Now, given the 1 year between 2019 and 2020,
and how life changed so drastically.
Yes, and that's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
COVID was really a game changer, and for many people it was a reset to reevaluate their lives and their priorities. For other people, they might have felt naked and exposed, and they found themselves spiraling into a depression, unemployment, underemployment, isolation, a number of different things. So when I think about that, and I think about the purpose of life satisfaction, I'm also reminded that in 2019, there were over 84,000 books that were part of the genre of self-help. Now that's interesting.
Over 84,000?
Yes. Now, back in 2012, this is interesting, Sue Ellen, there was 22,000 books that had the word happiness in its title. And I did a quick search before I came here on Amazon just to see what Amazon Books revealed. And there was over 8,000 books that had to do with happiness. And there was less than 71 that had to do with life satisfaction. I think what people are looking for in a complicated world is how to be happier and more content with themselves. But the formula that we've been taught from early on up until adulthood is not working. We need to approach this differently. We need to look at life from a more satisfactory perspective rather than saying I just want to be happy, because then you get into that game where you say if I only had X or if I only achieved Y, I'm going to be happy.
Right.
Well, it doesn't quite work that way, because it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning when we opened up this conversation. What happens when you finally get to that point where you get married, or you get that car that you always wanted, or you think you got the dream job? What then? And one of the things that resonates in this book is that I'm addressing work-life balance. Interesting statistic also. Did you know that over 13 million Americans have more than one job?
Over 13 million adults. So what percentage would that be about?
I would say that's probably around 7%.
Yes.
And what's interesting about that is we only have 24 hours in a day. So when we think about work-life balance, well, if we were to sleep 8 hours a day, that leaves us with 16 hours of production time to enjoy work and also personal relationships and leisure. If you're working more than one job and you're pushing 50, 60, in some cases 70 hours a week, depending if you're holding 2 or 3 jobs or maybe your job is more intensive, people are suffering when it comes to their overall well-being and the degree of life satisfaction. And that's the problem that we're facing, and that's why I think the statistics about depression is most concerning. To put it in perspective, the statistic of 2020 saying that 84 million people are suffering from depression, think about it like this. It also goes on to say that 1 in 3 adults have depression.
I've heard that stat.
The next time you're walking through Publix or going about your daily business, just count every 3 adults. And statistically speaking, you're probably going to come across somebody naturally that is suffering from depression. That could also explain why so many people are rude when you're trying to interact with them at restaurants and other places.
Exactly, because you don't know the baggage or what they're dealing with, both in their life in general or just that day. Maybe something really terrible happened to them that day. And I didn't mean to sound unkind when I said about not being around people who make you feel bad. But if that's a consistent thing that they're doing in your life, I like your definition of what to do as far as just limit your interactions. Or, for example, if someone's always complaining, maybe you can go to a movie or a concert with them. So you don't really hear their complaining. You do something that's fun together, and then you have something that you can automatically talk about.
Yeah, and what you're describing is part of emotional intelligence, where you're self-evaluating or you're self-aware, you're mindful of the other person's emotions, and then you're trying to figure out how to make changes to your environment, like picking out a concert, something that you know that person's going to enjoy. You find that common ground and you start to interact with them with that. So you can try to minimize the negativity and the negative emotions and try to bring out the best in their interactions.
What exactly do you mean when you talk about emotional intelligence? You're talking about an innate ability that people have?
You know, it's actually not innate. I wish it was present at birth because it would make it a lot easier for all of us. But when we talk about emotional intelligence, there's intrapersonal and interpersonal ways to approach this, which has to do with self-awareness. It helps with empathy, motivation, how we self-regulate, how we adapt to environmental change. And that is not something that we are born with, so it's certainly not innate. It's something we learn.
But as you say that, there are definitely some kids that are more chill than other kids.
Oh, yes, there are. And there could be a number of different reasons for that. Upbringing has a lot to do with it, and this conversation becomes really complex to talk about it because there's so many different variables that play into whether or not somebody's going to be more extroverted or introverted, whether or not they're going to be likable or unlikable. And it is an art. It's a skill. But even if you're socially awkward, you can get to a point in your development where you start to become self-aware, you start to make changes, you start to see what does books tell us about this subject, and you try to apply it to real-life situations. And the minute that application works when you're interacting with someone, now you might get a smile from someone, for example, and now you're like, okay, I think that might work. I'm going to try doing that again. And you try to duplicate it more. And that's the important thing. So somebody that might not be as gregarious when they're younger might actually turn into that, chill person, as you said, that you want to be around. They are fun. But let's face it, when we're around people that always want to have fun, that's not too enjoyable either.
Yeah, that's pretty tiring as well. I really enjoy either reading or watching some type of story that tells me about the different types of people, and I feel like even if it's fictional or based on fiction, that I am learning something from their experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. My friend Laura from California, she asked me a question. I forgot how she worded it, but to paraphrase what I said, Laura, what's the point in writing a book if you're not teaching something? And her remark back to me was, I never thought of it like that. I said, seriously, I spent 17 months researching and writing, and it was a painful process. And here it is. If I don't have something to teach, I don't want to tell the story. So there's a lot of anecdotal lessons in here that are practical. Most of them can be applied to everybody's life, and we could all learn something of value from it. So like you, I like spending a lot of my time in solitude, and I like spending a lot of time in quiet environments where I can just reflect. I can think, I can write, I can read. And these are important things that are important to me, and it sounds like they're important to you as well. If we're always surrounded by people, that's not enjoyable either. If we spend too much time by ourselves, that's equally not enjoyable. The right balance, moderation between the way we interact with our community members and people we enjoy being around, and also spending enough time with ourselves, is one of the most important things that we can do for our own mental health. And more people need to understand it. And I'll give you an example. Whenever I talk to my young people at the high school, they always think I'm talking about loneliness when I say spend time by yourself. And I said, you have to understand that there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is involuntary. If nobody wants to interact with you, you're kind of forced to spend time by yourself. On the other hand, if you spend time in quality solitude, it's a voluntary state of being. It's a space that you've carved out in your daily activities where you could just sit there and read, think, reflect, listen to some music that's important to you, and just be yourself and enjoy your own company. When you can do that, you always get to a point where you say to yourself, okay, I'm enough time with myself. I need to call some friends and I need to interact with the community again. That is the difference between loneliness and solitude. And it's always interesting to me how young people, they view this topic very differently and they don't understand the difference, but I'm sure time will fix the way they approach this.
Well, or open-mindedness.
Or open-mindedness, absolutely. Because let's face it, in today's technologically advanced world, we are constantly bombarded with stimuli. Interesting. Did you know that every second we are bombarded with approximately 11 million pieces of information or stimuli?
11 million?
11 million.
Wow.
Now, if you think about all the stimuli in this room and all the fine details that we choose to ignore because it has no value to us, we're only paying attention to 25 to 40 pieces of information at a time. This is why people in a conversation often ask, what did you just say? Because they weren't paying attention. Well, no wonder, there's too much around. Now you put the cell phone, technology, and all that stimulation that comes with it. I don't know about you, but oftentimes I want to run away from it because I'm overstimulated. I don't think my brain can process all that information. I can feel the stress associated with it. So for me to pull back for a couple hours a day, because I start my day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's 2 hours in the morning that is dedicated to myself, and it's a sanctuary for me. And I don't have any technology in front of me unless I'm reading from my iPad, and I just spend my time in my study, listening to soft music, drinking some coffee, reading a good book, maybe spending some time in prayer. And that's how I like to start my day. Every morning I do the same thing for the last 10 years. And I'll tell you, it helps me frame my mindset for the rest of the day. And when I try to explain this to young people, I think they think I'm crazy.
Yeah, I think that they would, because young people are usually of the mind that they set their alarm for 15 minutes before they have to leave the house.
And 15 minutes might be too long for them.
Yeah.
It's more like 2 minutes.
So the idea of getting up early deliberately just to have that extra time. I'm actually taking a class at IRSC with a couple of friends, part of the Fielden Institute. It's called Meditation and Mindfulness.
Interesting.
And I thought that it would be very helpful. The three of us that are taking it together are all kind of in the same place in their life. They're kind of winding down their professional life and dealing with other issues as far as family life. And I found it very interesting. I've never done any type of meditation before, and in this tasking world, I've really not been mindful. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times that I've eaten breakfast standing up in the kitchen in front of the refrigerator. And that is certainly not mindful eating. And, you know, as our professor was describing what mindfulness was, you know, I realized that if I'm eating by myself, no matter what I'm doing, I feel like I have to either have a book or the computer or the radio or something. I feel like I'm wasting time unless I'm doing at least two things at once. And when you get to the end of the day, that's exhausting.
Yeah. And it's not sustainable. And I think the more mileage we put on our lives, the more it affects us, our physical well-being.
I like that description, the more mileage we put on our lives, you know, instead of getting old.
Yeah. And I'm starting to realize that I'm young, obviously, but I'm realizing as time passes and I have more mileage on my life, making structural changes to my schedule so I'm not standing up and eating and I'm on the run all the time and sitting down and being more mindful about my environment, it really does. It serves my body well. It serves my mind well. And interestingly, when we talk about mindfulness training, our gray matter, especially in our hippocampi, which is where we start to form new memories, actually starts to increase in density as a result of it. It's actually quite fascinating. They've run studies in psychology based on it. And I can't remember the monk's name. He's now a monk, but he's a former physicist, and he runs experiments, he publishes research, he's run studies on himself and other people, and that's what they find. So I think I like your decision to take a class on mindfulness, but let me ask you a kind of provocative question, if I may. Why did you decide to take a class on mindfulness? It could have been literature. Why that?
Because there weren't any classes on literature that were being offered. There was actually one class that looked kind of interesting. It was called The Worst of Musical Theater. And if it had been the best of musical theater, I would have been fascinated. If it had just been musical theater, I might have liked it. But as somebody who raised a son who was very involved in musical theater and still is, I feel like I don't want to see the worst in musical theater. So there weren't a lot of other options, and there was a writing workshop, and as a lifelong writer and a published writer as well, I would have liked to have done that kind of thing, because the thing about writing is it's something you do all your life and you can constantly improve. But there was like a class of 8 and it filled up right away, so that wasn't an option. So I had to pick between options. I didn't want to learn about something technical. I didn't want to learn something accounting wise. I didn't want to learn about Social Security and how to apply it. I wanted something that would feed my soul.
Oh, feed your soul. So you
That's
wanted
what I
to
wanted.
slow down.
I wanted something that would be a life-changing thing. I didn't want it just to be like getting more education on something.
Well, I got another question for you. If this class was offered 15 years earlier, would you have chosen that class? I'm kind of thinking probably not.
Probably not.
And why?
Because I was too busy multitasking.
You know, it's interesting.
There was not a time in my life where I would have wanted to slow down.
See, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book as well. I talk about how we live in a Western culture and we pride ourselves on achievement. And what I'm saying in essence with this book is we need to have a paradigm shift from a focus on achievement to that of life satisfaction. And going back to my analogy before about life as we get older and having more mileage on our life, we get to a point where we realize, is achievement the only criteria for a life well lived? And then we start searching what can feed our soul. And we start to look for things that we never looked for before. And I think that's what you were doing.
I think that's probably true. And I pulled a couple of my friends along with me, and we're really enjoying some of the things that we're getting from it. It's nice having something together that we do together with a couple of women that I don't see all the time otherwise. So I think, I talked about being a lifelong learner. And that's something that I feel very strongly about. And some people turn that into, like, I know a lot of my friends' kids have turned it into staying in college for 15 years. That's not what I'm talking about.
No, it's
when
not.
I say being a lifelong learner. Don't keep going back and getting another degree unless it's something that feeds your soul, so to speak. Yeah. But lifelong learning is being open to new ideas and concepts along the way.
And sharing those experiences with other people. So what I often tell people as well is I am a student, but I'm also a teacher. And I think regardless of credentials, we're all students, we're all teachers. We all have something to share. We all have some type of value that we can offer to other people that's going to resonate with them. Not everything, but some things. And that's what I usually tell people. Consider yourself to be both a teacher and a student simultaneously.
My background as a writer led me to, I have probably 4 or 5 different started manuscript type things that are all fictional, that are based on different times in my life, and nothing published. But what I have published is actually short stories and Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I've published a number of different stories in Chicken Soup for the Soul. The latest one just came out a couple weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And it's Chicken Soup for the Grieving, and it's a story about my mom, but it's not a maudlin, sad story. It's a story about our shared love of food and how she showed her love with food. And I felt really good about the fact that I found something so positive to write about in a subject that was not necessarily, I mean, when you write about the passing of somebody, whether you and they had a great relationship or not, it's still something that sometimes is harder to look for the positive. So at any rate, one of the things that I like about the fact that you used personal anecdotes in your book is that you took those experiences from your life, kind of like a Chicken Soup type book, and you embedded them as part of your instruction, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's 2 things that come out when you were saying that. I was thinking of Frederick Nietzsche, a 19th century philosopher, and another philosopher that I'll mention in a moment. But I was thinking about how life can be insufferable at times, and life is a journey of suffering. And for Nietzsche, he says if you can basically figure out your why, you can find it bearable for any how to get there. And I think that that's important because we have to understand that the very art of suffering is the way I like to address it. I refer to suffering as an art. The art of suffering allows us to journey through life, and it allows us to contrast with things that are good at one point against things that were very negative in our past. So we could truly have, I guess, an academic yardstick or a measurement of how we feel now. And it's not getting to one place, but it's the journey and it's the experience that makes us feel more holistic and feel good about ourselves.
And the journey, we were talking about different people and different attitudes, but, for example, the journey of 2 people who perhaps grew up in the same house as siblings might be they may have similar genes, similar experiences,
And they're so different.
They're so very different.
Yeah.
And so it's really up to you and the direction you're going to take things. And self-help books, this is categorized as a self-help book, but sometimes they come off like they know everything, like the author knows everything, and that if you don't do it the way they say, then you're doing it wrong. It doesn't sound like your book does that.
No, I think I've hit a point where I know I don't know everything, but I do have something to share.
And, as I said, it may not be the same thing to everybody. You may find different things to pick out about it.
Yeah, there's one more piece that I think you would like. Have you ever read the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
No, but I read excerpts from it.
Oh, it's really powerful, and I like that because, as you're probably already aware, he was transported from an Auschwitz concentration camp to the Dachau death camp, and he eventually was released, and he made it out okay. And while he was walking up to the gate, because I've been to that camp several times already, you're greeted with this expression about Mark frei, and translated from German to English is "work will set you free." And of course, you can say, well, when the work finally breaks you and you die, you're free. But I think for Frankl, that was really important because it helped shape his logotherapy, and it also allowed him to eventually write the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And then he comes up with the will for meaning. And he talks very explicitly about his experiences and stories in that book. And he goes on to basically say what Nietzsche was saying, as his work influenced him as well. He goes on to say that if you can find your why, you can increase your contentment. And I think we could agree that in that death camp, there's nothing but misery around you, and people are dying constantly. Most unfortunate thing. And yet he was able to find hope, and he was able to address his why, even though he wasn't working, and he was undergoing a tremendous amount of suffering. And he came out and he talked about his experience. And as he goes on as a psychiatrist, he tries to get people that are on the verge of suicide or people that are depressed to try to find their why. And he helps them through that journey. And as he helps them through that journey, they start to recover because they realize it's not about having the right amount of income. It's not about having the right girlfriend or boyfriend or the right car or the right zip code where we live. It's about how we identify our experiences along that journey that helps us with life's fulfillment. And I think that that's powerful. And it's one of the things that I talk extensively about in the book when it comes to Nietzsche and also Frankl.
And I think that you could probably agree that the majority of us haven't gone through that level of suffering and nothingness. So when you put it in perspective, we're coming from a much more balanced place. But as you also pointed out, in the people that you meet in everyday life, you don't know where they're coming from, and you don't know that what happened to them wasn't something that changed their world or affected them so drastically that they feel like they can't go on. Now, you could be, that smile in the grocery store, that you hear, you go ahead, let me hold the door for you. Any of those things can make a difference in a stranger's life. So can you imagine how much difference you can make in a friend or a family member or those kids that are sitting in your class?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because we can't identify with Frankl's experience in a death camp, but we know it had to be horrific, and the suffering must have been so extensive that it could crush anybody. And I thought to myself, as I was going through all these readings and all these various books, I finally got to chapter 3, telling my story, and it turns out to be, I think, just over 100 pages. And I decided to make it as transparent as possible so people know that I'm not speaking from a position of authority. I'm speaking from a position of strength because I was broken and now I'm whole. And that's the important thing that I want to make to people, because if anybody's reading it and they do find themselves depressed, or they experiencing that existential crisis where they're trying to think about the end of their life because they can't see hope, I think chapter 3 could help with that thought process.
But this book isn't just for somebody who's depressed
No.
to pick up, to read, to change.
No.
When you talk about a practical approach to life satisfaction, no matter where you are in life or what you're doing, you can improve upon
That's right.
your life satisfaction by using that emotional knowledge and
Correct.
grit.
Yeah.
We just have a couple more minutes. I haven't addressed grit. And I'd like to, I know we just have a couple minutes, but when you talk about grit, what do you define it as, and how can people get it?
Well, it's interesting. It's not innate. It's something we can learn and develop over a period of time. And grit has 2 domains. You've got perseverance and consistency of interest, and passion fits into that as well. So it's not about your ability, and it's about also suffering. If you think about the definition of suffering, it's passion, or passion is suffering. So perseverance piece of the grit component is basically saying that when we have life challenges that are insurmountable, and we all have them in one season of our life or another, and some of us experience it constantly, how do we compartmentalize these issues and these challenges so we can go through it and still,
And that's what grit is.
and still accomplish things? It requires focus, perseverance, consistency, and determination.
And that being said, too, when you talk about things that are difficult for us to get through, that measurement is different for every person, too. And, you know, think again about a teenager who, you know, something that happened that is just awful, and then, you know, 3 weeks later, they don't even remember what it was because it really wasn't that bad.
Absolutely.
But to them, you can't tell them that it's not the worst thing. So
It's a
all
journey.
relative. Yes, it is. Robert Ott has been my guest, and he is the author of a book called A Practical Approach to Life Satisfaction, powered by emotional knowledge and grit. So we've seen the book. How can people get a hold of the book, or how can people sign up for your class at IRSE?
They could certainly sign up for my classes at IRSC every academic quarter, or summer classes. They could pick up the book through Barnes & Noble, Amazon, other distributors as well, but those 2 seem to be pretty popular right now.
Okay. Well, thanks again for being my guest today. This has really been an interesting conversation, and hopefully if you're listening, you can have some takeaways from it that are easy to implement. Thanks again, Robert, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. We're here every week with more.
Go to WPSL.com, click on Programming Schedule, and find Sue Ellen Sanders all weekend long sometimes. This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie, the tongue of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world on Google Home.